Hey everybody, it's Dino Chiesa with Apogee. I'm here with Robert Brockelman from Level, and we're here to talk about API governance in the enterprise. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here.
Welcome everybody else. So first, a little bit of an introduction to the people that are here. My name's Dino. I work with Apogee. I've been with the company for about 4 years, and I've known Robert for maybe two and a half years.
Roughly, yeah.
And we've worked together, and I'll let Robert introduce himself.
Sure. Robert Brockelman. I work for Level. It's an East Coast consulting firm. I am a principal consultant there. I run their API management integration practice.
And you've got a lot of background in integration technology. You're an old gray hair like me. So.
Yes. I even shaved this morning and to make all the gray hair go away. So looking at the picture right now. I've been involved in various aspects of middleware, identity, integration, and now API management for 20 years.
A lot of background.
Yeah.
Good deal. All right, so just want to remind everybody, the video that you're seeing will be later available on YouTube. The slides will be available on SlideShare, and of course, the Apogee community is always there as a place where you can go and ask questions or enter into a discussion about this topic or any other topic. So just want to remind people, just a little commercial message. And now I'll kind of yield to Robert. You can tell you a little bit about his employer.
Sure, absolutely. Again, Level, East Coast consulting firm, specialized in API management, integration, application development, mobile development, payments, and about anything else you could come up with in the IT industry. We have done it at some point.
Great. So let's move in, and we'll kind of take it away. Now, this is going to be something that you're going to talk about. You're the expert here on API governance in the enterprise. I'm going to be maybe interrupting you.
And
asking a few questions.
I'll be glaring over him every now and then when he does that, realizing that that's all planned.
So take it away.
Okay, so first, every one of these webcasts that I've done, any presentations I've given, if you've seen them before, I have my standard list of disclaimers. We're going to run through those very quickly. First, what we present here today is one of numerous possible ways to use Apogee technology. Your situation and requirements will probably differ. If they don't, you probably want to reevaluate what it is you're doing. Maybe some details you're missing. As always, test things in a non-production environment prior to using anything in production. It'll avoid you having an especially bad day. And most importantly, we are not responsible for the spontaneous combustion of the known universe or any other undesirable outcomes associated with using what is discussed here today.
All right, so with those disclaimers out of the way,
yes,
what are we going to talk about?
We are going to talk about API governance in the enterprise.
All right, terrific.
Our agenda is going to be very quickly, summary of what is API management, API management, the full stack, API management solution architecture, and then the meat of this presentation, what is API governance, one organization's requirements for API governance, API lifecycle management, what API governance ties into, and some lessons learned.
So really in the beginning, we're going to talk about API management, just sort of define it, just to level set everybody on the terms and the space that we're talking about. All right.
We have to do that. We can't do a presentation in Abogee's office without talking about API management first.
Yeah.
So very quickly, what is API management? It's the thing we all know and love. It's an organized approach to using APIs to open up an organization's data so that other systems or other third-party organizations can use that data in new and useful ways.
And API management is related to API development? I mean, am I doing API management if I just build an API in .NET or in Java or in Golang? Just expose an API? I mean, I'm exposing system data.
And if you want to, you can certainly build APIs. You could expose it internally or to the internet. You don't necessarily have to embrace any of these ideas that we've thrown out there on what API management is. You certainly don't have to use an Apogee or something else in that segment of the industry. But if you want to optimize your approach, if you want to be using a lot of out-of-the-box functionality that you don't have to necessarily build yourselves, looking at API management solutions such as Apogee is probably would benefit you greatly and the consumers of your APIs.
Got it. Okay.
Read on. All right, so from a business perspective, API management is a revolution. From a technical perspective, it is an evolution of the earlier service-oriented architecture paradigm, or SOA paradigm.
So interesting. So it's a revolution in that. Could you say more about what that means?
It certainly starts tying together a business or an organization's data with what the business guys are doing, what they're thinking about. They're thinking about how the technology can help them to be better and more efficient at their business, open up new lines of business. That's what I've always thought the revolution is.
It's almost as if we are kind of climbing up some ladder of maturity from, in the old days, it was a minor miracle just to get connectivity together, and we would celebrate when we would get two systems to talk together.
Sometimes that's still the case.
But now what we're talking about is making that super efficient, just dropping the obstacles to connecting these things so that we can enable business partners, we can enable internal teams, just making things a lot quicker.
Yes.
The whole idea of APIs is to make things easier. Yeah, so I get that part.
All right, API management spans B2E, B2C, and B2B user spaces. It also spans mobile, integration, identity, and security concerns. Probably a bunch of other things too, but those are the ones that are very near and dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm. And so some of the people that I work with look at, when they look at API management, they're applying it to a very kind of constrained problem space that they're looking at. And it's not all of those things, but the problems that you've been focusing on, the situation that you've been focusing on is how to apply API management writ large. Like
across the enterprise. Yes, for large organizations.
Yeah.
That is what we're here to talk about today.
Great.
Okay, so if you've seen my earlier webcast, my favorite list of definitions and descriptions of what API management, I threw them in here again. I'm not going to read all these again, but I have found that one or more of these tend to be ring true or mean something to everybody who's writing APIs, consuming APIs, or trying to apply API management to their situation. My favorite two are down at the bottom. API management enables the monetization of APIs, and it is the intersection of technology, business, organization, and integration concerns.
Yeah, it's got to cover all those if you're looking at it strategically.
Yes, for sure.
Good stuff.
Now, next, a concept I like to call API management the full stack, especially if you're in the enterprise and that enterprise hasn't updated their technology stack, or they skipped the SOA paradigm altogether. It's very likely that even if they want to deploy an API gateway, API management solution, that there are other pieces, foundational components of it that they're missing. As an example, if you originally did SOA, there's probably a registry and repository out there that you're going to be building on top of from a developer portal perspective. Your identity stack, every organization is going to need one of those, and that's going to have several different components. You're going to have all your application infrastructure, whether you're a JEE shop, whether you're a .NET, whether you're something newer with Node.js or JavaScript, or I mean, the possibilities are limitless, but those three tend to cover over 80% of the shops that I'm normally working with. And then off on the side, you've got your DevOps tooling, logging, monitoring, and then from the standpoint of being able to build and deliver APIs, you've got your traditional data modelers and interface modeling, which is probably something that was introduced to many shops with when they started going down the SOA path.
Mm-hmm. And on the left, you've got sort of the generic wireframe block diagram of these basic building blocks. Whereas on the right, you've got just a bunch of different possible vendors that would fit in different categories.
Just about every imaginable combination of the company logos that are on here, there is probably a shop out there somewhere using those.
And you're not saying in the company that we're talking about, who we're not going to name, but you're not saying that the companies that you've talked about have used all of these.
Certainly not. They're using a small subset of what's on here. The logos that I chose on here are from a wide array of different level customers and shops that we've talked to.
Listen, the next time you do this slide, could we just make the Apogee logo a little bigger?
Absolutely. I apologize. That was my mistake.
All right, so that's the full stack, and this is helpful for talking about where API management would fit in when you're talking with people in the enterprise who maybe are familiar with some of these other pieces, but wonder, okay, what is this new thing? If you're not familiar with API management, this is how you would see it integrating with these other pieces.
The trick to all of this is tying it together to build a cohesive and meaningful and functional solution.
It's easy. You just sort of draw these boxes and then it's just basically done, right?
Actually, we spent about 3 weeks going back and forth for how to outline all those logos, but that's not important. And I will point out that the Apogee logo is almost dead center in that diagram.
That's good. So yeah, I like that part.
Good.
All right,
good.
So that's the full stack. These are the pieces that we're going to talk about integrating. These are the pieces that a big enterprise is going to need to integrate. And let's talk about the governance and what that looks like.
All right. One more piece on tying back to the webcast I did back in January. What we ultimately came up with as an API solution, you've got your API gateway, you've got a number of other components, the developer portal, the management portal. If you're using Apogee BAS, if you're using Apogee, as we hope you are, you also have Apogee BAS sitting out there. You've also got your identity providers, you have an authorization policy engine, you've got your logging subsystem, all of these pieces are working together to build a functioning API management, API gateway ecosystem that works at runtime. You've got API consumers, you've got API providers. Those consumers could be mobile apps, they could be spa apps, they could be your business partners, they could be SaaS solutions. Likewise, the API providers it could be third-party APIs, it could be homegrown APIs, it could be more stuff from your business partners, SaaS API providers. This stuff could be in the cloud, it could be hosted on-premise. Another interesting detail that falls out from this picture is what you would deploy for all this stuff out in the cloud could also be deployed on-premise. It looks very similar. One of the few differences between these is the ubiquitous use of SaaS APIs out in the cloud versus maybe COTS, commercial off-the-shelf APIs that you've deployed on-premise.
So when you say on-premises, they could be in a data center that a customer has managed, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in a physical data center. It could be, for example, in VMs that's managed by some public cloud provider.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we say on-premises, really maybe a better word at this point might be customer managed.
Yes, that would be good. That would be a good description of it. I will say many of my large organizations I've worked with, they are still doing things in their own data centers.
They got their own data centers, and so it's really on a premises that they manage. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay.
All right, moving on. So this brings us to the meat of what we're here to talk about today. What is API governance? Well, API governance is part of API management. It is probably the most important part.
And I assume that a lot of the people that signed up just to kind of participate in this webinar, they're already familiar with some aspects of API governance or governance in IT in general. So they've got some familiarity, but how do we apply it to APIs and API management?
By paying very close attention to what we're talking about here today. So first up, I want to acknowledge that there are probably many people watching this now and in the future where they had bad experiences with governance. It was very draconian, overbearing, a lot of manual processes. I don't disagree. Governance done incorrectly probably does more harm than it does good. In fact, anything that is truly adopted by the enterprise has to have functional governance. We're not going to escape that anytime soon, no matter how many fancy features that you build into a product. The trick is to strike the right balance. I believe that with the appropriate amount of self-service and automation applied to really anything in IT, but the governance, you can have workable processes.
To me, there's a lot of parallel in the shift from, let's say, SOA to API that brought in ease of use and just an easier way to get similar things done. We're kind of seeing maturity in the governance side as well, where you can automate a lot of these processes and get the governance you need without the burden on the people that are actually building things.
Yes, whether you're talking about DevOps or just automation efforts, making IT easier to work with, being able to deliver things faster. Those same basic ideas now need to be taken to the enterprise and applied to the governance processes that have been there for a long time.
You can't abandon governance because it's been difficult. You got to make it better. You got to automate it, make it more effective. Yep. Okay.
So, API governance allows for a policy-driven approach to enforcement, not just at runtime, but at the design and development time as well, and the processes associated with that. It provides a single point to manage policies and enforcement versus an ad hoc approach to these.
Yeah, so I want to ask you, use this word policy a couple times in this statement. And Apogee Edge itself has this concept of a policy, which is a bit of logic that gets reused in an API proxy. Is that what you're talking about here?
No, what I'm talking about is policies, business policies, IT governance policies, information security policies, change management policies, those types of policies, maybe policies with an uppercase P. Now, the means of implementing and enforcing those policies with an uppercase P at runtime is through the Apogee Edge API proxy.
So some of those governance policies will be implemented by, let's say, a policy in Apogee Edge that does XML schema verification.
Yes.
Or something that verifies that a checksum or an HMAC is correct on an inbound payload. If the business policy says we need application level security on this message, then you're going to have a policy.
Quota enforcement.
But there are other policies that are going to be things like, well, we need to go through these stages of the life cycle, and these are the only parties in our organization that are permitted to promote to production. Those are different policies, and that's really not going to be implemented in an Apigee Edge policy.
No, it is not, but that would be captured in your API governance processes.
Okay.
What's exposed in the developer portal may impact how the process of your developer portal uses.
Yeah. Okay. So really good.
All right. So API governance includes tracking what is deployed where, what API is deployed in what environment, which environment, tracking who is calling what, how each API is protected, defining interface standards, gathering statistics about the API consumers, the APIs themselves, and the developer portal, API versioning, JSON and possibly XML schema versioning, tracking routing information, tracking what policy should be applied to each API, with the processing policies that we mentioned in the last slide, and then sunsetting or retiring versions of APIs.
And how do you capture all this? This is kind of a big universe of things that fall under API governance, but is there a single document, or what does it look like?
Well, there's a couple different aspects to it. For each individual API, you're going to have a interface definition. It could be Swagger, it could be the next step beyond that, Open API. There's a Waddle, there's a couple other standards out there. Apigee Edge is obviously focused on Open API and Swagger traditionally.
So that's how I can define interfaces, but how do I, for an enterprise, how do I define, these are the requirements that we're going to make on these kinds of APIs that will be extended to business partners?
Some of it would be documentation that would be exposed to the API consumers in the developer portal.
Yep.
Your internal development standards about what your APIs need to look like. On the JSON and XML side, the schemas that your data modelers create that are then fed into your interface definitions that your interface modelers, maybe the same people that your developers use. So there's several different pieces. All these things flow together to create a functioning API governance platform.
Got it. Makes sense. All right.
Okay. So now I want to look at one example organization's requirements that they had around API governance at the very beginning of their adoption of API management. This was a large enterprise organization. Again, there's going to be unique requirements for each organization. There's also going to be a fair amount of overlap. So the example requirements, they needed isolation between non-production and production. With Apigee, this was accomplished with having two separate Apigee organizations. There were 3 environments in the non-prod and 1 in the production environment. One environment in the production organization. There were a total of 4 environments that were included in their SDLC. The organization already used Swagger 2.0 and had a fairly rich set of standards around how APIs were developed with those. Next slide.
And this organization, we're not going to name the organization. Could you characterize? This is a pretty big organization. Yeah.
Definitely. It's a household name. It's a well-known industry. Work with lots of business partners. Have lots of customer-facing components. Lots of money moving through the system.
And a kind of a mature IT organization. They've been running for a long time. They've got a lot of different pieces, and they're always moving forward, always looking for opportunities to improve things and optimize, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, they had a third-party identity provider, Azure Active Directory, that was used. Furthermore, Azure Active Directory was going to act as a token generator for all actors. Apigee had to be customized to work with Azure Active Directory generated tokens, JOT tokens in particular. This requirement came from the organization's Identity and Access Management Group and their Information Security team. This one detail drove most of the complexity that the organization encountered, especially in customizing the developer portal. And then they used top-down development methodology rather than the API-first design methodology that Apigee totes. It's potentially a direction they take that in the future. And then most importantly, they were building an API management program that supported the entire business rather than a particular line of business or development group. This created a very large body of work, many different concerns that had to be broken up into multiple phases, and they've been working on this for the last couple of years.
So there's some customers that I've worked with that look at a particular business problem, maybe a point problem, and try to apply API management to that, and the scope of that solution is going to be much smaller. But what you're talking about here with this organization, that's not how they approached it at all.
It is, no, they did the polar opposite of that. And whether even in a large organization, whether they try to implement points, work with something within like mobile. API management often comes out of the mobile group first, and then expands from there, versus a top-down architectural approach where they take something like the API management concept and figure out how do we apply this across our enterprise to our enterprise architecture and our design standards, and use to do things better, faster, cheaper, and take us to the next level. That depends on the culture of your organization and how you go about doing things.
So maybe some organizations might want to take this point approach, but really it's not going to, that point approach is not going to be able to scale to the enterprise unless you do the foundational work, the kinds of stuff that you had to go through with this organization. Yeah, that's when it allows it to scale into the larger strategic.
A key component of API governance is API Lifecycle Management. API Lifecycle Management tracks the interface's lifecycle, not the implementations. That's a key difference. You can version your implementation, maybe it has an extra digit on the version number, but what API management, API governance, and API lifecycle management are all about is tracking the interface and the lifecycle of that interface as it moves through the development process, through your environments, and eventual sunsetting. The details may vary, but basically it describes the promotion process of the life cycle of an API version from the initial concept to definition to the lowest-level development environment, then to production, and then eventual sunsetting.
So I want to ask you a question. You're talking about the life cycle of the API, but there's an independent, I like your comments on this, life cycle of the system that exposes the API. So I'm building it in .NET, or I'm building it in Golang, or I'm building it in something, and that system is separate from the API lifecycle that you're talking about here, or is it?
How you capture this can vary, but there's definitely a relationship between the two. You know, for example, maybe you have an interface that's, you know, version 1.0, something major version, minor version. Maybe your implementation has a build number attached onto that. So, you know, you could have for API interface version 1.0, there's version 1.0.3, and 3 represents the third deployment, the third build of the implementation of that interface. That's how I've seen one organization do it. There's a number of other ways, but there's definitely a relationship, but you're probably going to do additional, you know, bug fixes, additional builds, and there's, the implementation is going to change more often than the interface stuff.
I see, yes, interesting, okay.
All right, so as an example, suppose you have a unit test environment, quality assurance environment, load testing environment, and production environment. And then let's also assume that you want to capture a couple of additional steps in your life cycle of inception of an API, definition of an API, the development process, just, you know, sitting down writing the code, and then eventual retirement. These things all taken together represent 8 distinct steps that might represent your API life cycle.
And you've got to kind of consider all of that when you in the governance process, yeah.
Absolutely. Now, API governance in the enterprise is going to tie into a number of existing concerns for IT management. Change management, asset management, configuration management, legacy SOA governance, quality assurance, information security, IT auditing, and I know, I'm sorry, but these things are important if you want anything to be successful in the enterprise. Now, that fourth bullet point, legacy SOA governance, the goal is that this API governance paradigm that we're describing here eventually replaces that.
But eventually, this is going to be, it depends on the organization, because there's some cases where it's not really legacy. It's just a system that works, it's in place, it's delivering the value that it needs to deliver, and it doesn't need to be changed. So why tear it up, right?
Exactly.
Why turn it over?
Exactly. In all likelihood, an organization's change management processes have been slowly evolving for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
You're not going to go in and replace that overnight without creating a great deal of, I'm just going to call it a big mess.
Yeah.
What there might be is an opportunity to take all these things and start applying automation and self-service. Maybe the Apogee Developer Portal is the center of the world for all these things. But the processes and organizations the processes that an organization utilizes should reflect all these details. And yes, as you pointed out, it does sound very heavyweight, but again, effective self-service and processes makes all the difference in the world of rolling something like this out.
Yeah, and if you're going to be rolling API management as a strategic piece of the puzzle for a large enterprise, you need all this. You need all this to be formalized.
And again, if you were going to take a large system like an API management program and graft it onto an existing enterprise, if you really want to get anything out of it and actually have it solve real-world business problems, the governance and processes and self-service and automation around those processes have to be there. And the only way you're going to get there is if you sit down and work through all those messy details, do the hard work. DevOps, API governance, API management also ties into DevOps. I almost had to just mention this because, you know, DevOps is a thing. It's there. It's not going away. The developer portal provides a self-service platform to allow developers to do all the traditional things we talked about in API management: register with the system, create applications, provision credentials, subscribe to APIs, view documentation, a whole bunch of other activities. The developer portal could also tie into DevOps to increase development activities and decrease cycle time, decrease mean time to resolution, enable stakeholder level overview, and ease compliance and reporting. If you can do all these things in a large enterprise, you're going to get a lot more out of DevOps.
So the way that Apigee thinks about the developer portal is as a complement to the API management capabilities that are in Apigee Edge. So developer portal is a way that developers can go find out which APIs are available and how do I use them. And that's part of what you're talking about here, but it doesn't sound like that's all of it. What your enterprise, what your customer, your organization was looking for is a portal that the developer can use for everything, not just API subscription, API catalogs, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just imagine the same place that you went to get API documentation and to get the credentials and the test accounts that you needed and define authorization policy. You could then start triggering the processes to get a change officially approved to be able to promote that into production, ideally through automated and self-service means. But wouldn't that be better than all the manual paperwork that I know I was filling out 20 years ago?
Or maybe for a new developer that's come over from a different team. So what are my practices here? What's the testing framework? What are the approved versions of different software platforms that I can use? How do I do my builds? You know, all that kind of stuff. Is that the kind of thing that you were imagining? So that's developer portal writ large. It's not developer portal for consumers of APIs, but it's that and everything else. So is that part of the customization that you did at this one enterprise?
Some of it is. The rest of it is planned. I hope they get there.
Yeah. That's a big part of it. Okay. Good stuff.
Okay. Finally, some lessons learned after doing this at a couple of very large organizations, including the one whose requirements we mentioned before. Most small to medium-sized organizations can probably use the Apigee developer portal out of the box. Maybe they change the look and feel of it. They upload the company logo. I think you described that as changing the skin of it. Most organizations will probably have some minor changes to what the out-of-the-box functionality does, but for the most part, probably works out of the box. Enterprise IT organizations tend to be a little different. Different equals messy details. Those messy details involve making a lot of customizations to the developer portal to accommodate whatever their API governance processes are that tie together all those things we mentioned before about their existing processes that they use to manage their IT organization. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, including that one. And you could probably find an example and a counterexample to just about every combination of things we could come up with. Next, not all organizations are focused on opening their data up to arbitrary third parties. I know that
we used to say, a lot of people used to think APIs mean, you know, I want to extend my capabilities to Joe consumer, Joe developer that's in, you know, freshman year at CS, some CS.
There's certainly a lot of that.
Yeah, that's part of it, but that's not what.
That's not where this organization started. Where they started was they had a lot of B2B integration partners that they exchanged millions of messages with a day. A lot of it was SOAP-based. The process of onboarding a new business partner, giving them the WSDL or the documentation that they needed, getting them credentials, going through the debugging process, getting them moved up through production. Many emails that went back and forth and a lot of conference calls. They were looking for a way to automate that and to cut down on it, and just the whole process of managing their the IT side of their business partner relationships better, faster, cheaper.
Just radically reduce the friction in onboarding new business partners.
Absolutely. And so to that end, one of the things that I see being a great fit for API management, especially the API governance and the developer portal, side of Apogee, for example, is anytime you've got a development team or an IT team that works with a large number of external teams, development teams that are beyond your control, and you've, again, lots of emails going back and forth, long times to onboard these actors, using the API management solution and its developer portal to start managing all those things would probably allow your organization to realize significant gains in productivity.
Let me ask you something. We didn't talk about this before, so this is might be a bit of a curveball. But
thanks.
Did you have to communicate with the business partners prior to rolling out API management? To what extent did you dialogue with them and say, look, this is what we're thinking about doing. These are the changes that might come. What do you think? Was it that kind of dialogue?
Honestly, there wasn't. There was one business partner I can think of that there was a very close relationship with, where there was certainly offline discussion about we need to make this better, we need to make this simpler.
Yeah.
I don't know that they were there as the solution was evolving, but they definitely liked the idea that there was a place they could go log into to be able to browse all the documentation for, whether it was Swagger for APIs or WSDLs for SOAP web services.
So that was a kind of a new motion for those business partners, and you had to, the organization, I don't know if it was you, had to educate them. This is what the new process is going to look like. Here's how it's going to work.
Ongoing.
Yeah.
Activities that are ongoing.
Yeah, yeah. Good stuff.
Right. Next, for this organization, API governance was an evolution of SOA governance, and the SOA governance paradigm that was already in place. They did not start from scratch. Not all organizations, even enterprise organizations, will be like that. If managing business partners, managing interfaces, ESB, SOAP services, APIs, the processes around this, how managing the day-to-day activities tie back into change management and all those other things we mentioned a couple slides back. If none of that exists in your organization, then you are starting from scratch, and there's a fair amount of legwork that needs to be done to get your API governance program to a point where it's going to be effective. Again, messy details. Best description I can think of for it.
Let me ask you something related to this evolution. What is it inside the organization that is required in order to power that? Do people need to learn new skills? Do you need new kinds of people? Is it just a matter of kind of educating them to do the same things that they're doing in different ways? Or can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It definitely involves change. The way that they did business, the way their day-to-day activities, the way they onboarded new consumers of services and APIs. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's certainly going to be different going forward with API governance and an API management solution. At the same time, you're also going to be able to do a lot more with less. Now, if the people that you have in place already are flexible and open-minded, it's just a matter of learning new skills. If nobody wants anything to change and are actively working against you, then it's probably a situation where some fresh blood and fresh ideas are needed. I've been in several organizations over the last 10 years that have gone through modernization efforts. This is really just another flavor, another variety of that modernization effort. There are always parties who are bitterly opposed to such activities.
Change can be scary.
Yes, it can. Change can be very scary. What Happened to My Cheese? Great book. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Anyway, change is always scary. Effective change in the IT space, in the technology space, it's going to happen eventually, no matter how much you resist it. Ideally, the organization can sit down and have an open and frank conversation about how to get there. Okay, so next, executive sponsorship. Buy-in from the business side and from senior management is critical. If you do not have that, just like any other large IT effort, it will eventually flounder.
And in this organization, you needed to communicate up in order to gather that sponsorship, in order to ensure that was there.
Plenty of time was spent on the politics. Yes,
yeah. That's just part of the job. Yeah.
All right, next, integration with that third-party identity provider is likely imperative in a large organization. Now, there's a key question here in terms of how much complexity this drives. Is Apogee Edge or the third-party IDP issuing tokens to API consumers? Yep. If it's the third-party IDP, then you're going to be introducing a great deal of complexity. Because if you have to start registering applications with the third-party IDP, you still need to have the exact same application definition and the exact same metadata registered in the Apigee Edge runtime. And that's needed because in order for Apigee Edge to use its out-of-the-box quota enforcement, business analytics, and a couple of other features that are likely used by most Apigee Edge customers, it has to know about those application definitions and the client identifiers and the subscription keys it sees, because that's how it tells who's calling.
And in this case, Azure AD was the identity provider for all actors, including apps.
Correct.
So Azure AD held client credentials and would issue a JOT, a JWT, which Apigee Edge could then verify using the public-private signing that Azure was performing. But still, Apigee Edge needed to know the identity of those of that client ID. So that's what you're talking about here, is the synchronization there.
Exactly what I'm talking about, and that right there provides a very good description of what most of the customization activities in the developer portal centered around.
And what you're saying here is if you let Apigee Edge issue the tokens, then things could be simpler, but that in this particular organization just wasn't
correct.
Target.
Yeah, we talked about that before. The IAM team had a identity stack where all tokens were centrally issued and centrally managed.
Had a policy for that.
They had a policy for that. It took a great deal of work, thousands of man hours to get to where they could say that. Most organizations can't say that, actually, and taking steps to move away from that, probably not in their best long-term interest.
Let me ask you this, how does it perform? Runtime.
Very well. Not as well as its Apigee Edge with the IDP, but we spent a lot of time building a authentication cache inside of Apigee Edge and some other components, so that only every so often you actually had to go back to Azure Active Directory.
So get the token, that's kind of an expensive operation, but verifying the token, less so, and works for the performance requirements.
Correct.
Yeah, good.
Next, we are done with the slide. I apologize.
Covered that, yeah.
Okay. The group that is supporting your Apigee Edge API gateway may not be the same group that supports the developer portal infrastructure. It's different skill sets. Developer portals, Drupals, and PHP. The Apigee Edge gateway is JavaScript, Node.js, and Edge policy. All likelihood, you're going to not have all that on the same team. I think that's created a little bit of consternation in a couple of clients that I've had who did a lot with modifying the developer portal. And then finally, my one criticism of out-of-the-box, I know it had to happen eventually, my one criticism of the out-of-the-box Apigee Edge developer portal, if you've got an organization like this where they have several different environments, and they want to be able to describe, and they have a bunch of different APIs that span a bunch of different systems. For each one of those APIs, they've got the interface definition, they've got the Swagger document. Ideally, you'd import that Swagger definition one time and then be able to map multiple endpoints representing each of those environments that you have to it.
Or QAT or
something like that, yes.
Or whatever it is. Yeah.
And there wasn't a good way to do that with the developer portal out of the box, so we had to build a mechanism to essentially be able to have one instance of the Swagger document for a particular version of an API, but have multiple base URLs referenced by it.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks were spent putting all that together so that it would work properly.
Yeah, I can understand that challenge. Yep.
So, you're looking for new features and Apigee Edge.
We're always looking for new features.
Good. And so with that, we are done. And do we have any questions?
Let's see. I'll see if I can come up with get the question and answers. So here's a question. Are the work or features to work with Azure AD, is that part of the Apigee Edge product now, so that other companies don't have to use that, or how would people take advantage of that? So I'll say a couple of things about that, and maybe you can comment as well. I think Robert probably worked quite a bit on doing some customization that connected the pieces in Azure AD with Apigee Edge and some other pieces inside the organization. Apigee Edge today can verify JWTs that are issued by Azure AD or Google Identity Provider or Ping or a bunch of different other JWT issuers. Apigee Edge can verify those things and also apply authorization decisions based on the claims in a JWT. But I don't think that situation, it wasn't that simple with this organization, if I'm correct.
That is correct, and this also started about 2 years ago, and some of the recent features that you guys have rolled out with OpenID Connect and its ability to wrap a third-party identity provider weren't there at the time. And next piece, well, the token validation is kind of your authentication step. The authorization step, there was because of ubiquitous use of third-party APIs and various InfoSec requirements, the organization that I'm thinking about right now is at very fine-grained authorization requirements that could potentially have to be implemented for various APIs, and being able to have the information needed at runtime to allow that to work required a deeper integration with the Azure Active Directory than was available out of the box 2 years ago.
So it's not just a matter of getting a SAML sign-on to the developer portal. There's a bunch of other things that we needed to do in order to make this all happen. Is that right?
Yes, that's a true statement.
Yeah. So the kinds of things that you were doing, though, you feel like that's kind of generic. You're probably going to see that in any large organization if they have this common IDP that's going to be used for all actors.
Within the guidelines and constraints of what I've described here, and there's caveats there, yes, that's a true statement. You're usually going to see something like that.
Next question we have is sort of unrelated to what we were just talking about, and the question is, what's the high-level roadmap for Apigee Edge, particularly in light of the Google acquisition plan?
Luckily, that one has nothing to do with me.
Yeah, you don't have an opinion on that?
No, I'm going to let you field that one.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't have a whole lot of detail to offer you in this case. Our current operating plan is business as usual, so we're going to continue to extend Apigee Edge. All of the existing products that we have, we plan to continue to use. Now, I don't have any visibility into what may change in the future, but for now, all the commitments that we've made, we're going to follow through on. So you should expect to see more and better Apigee Edge as time goes on, and just stay tuned, and we'll give you more details as we have them. So let's see, another question, a little bit off the topic. How will the Google acquisition impact the whole API management product? And also the deal we have with SAP, I don't know that I can answer that one either. So I'm not going to be able to provide any insight beyond what I've already just said.
Other question we have is, will the slides be available for download? Yes, they will. We'll definitely publish them on the Level webpage, level.io. Give us a couple of days, we'll get it out there.
Yeah, good stuff. So not seeing any other questions, so thanks to everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for coming in and doing the webinar. It's been a pleasure as always, and we'll see you next time.